National Fishermen and Pacific Marine Expo are proud supporters of the Galley Stories podcast, as we make similar efforts to highlight the people and topics that define commercial fishing. You can see what that looks like in print and online all year long, as well as every November in Seattle when this community comes together at PME. Check out nationalfisherman.com and pacificmarineexpo.com to learn more.
Hello and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, welcome to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler. Today we've got, actually, probably one of my favorite guys up here in Bristol Bay, Tim Willis from the NEM. How you doing, Tim?
Oh, great, Mark. Thanks.
All right. Well, you listen to a few. You know what you're getting into. So, where were you born, and how, what brought you up into the commercial fishing industry?
Oh, so I was born in California, Sonoma County. My family's from Northern California. A lot of them with Oregon roots and all kinds of different things. But my dad dabbled. He was a school teacher administrator and dabbled with trolling out of Bodega Bay when I was real young, and probably got my first little taste of like understanding what commercial fishing was about just by going out to the breakwater and catching bullheads on his little 26-foot wooden salmon troller. But then in high school I ended up coming up to Ecook and fishing set netting in Ecook with a next door neighbor's son-in-law.
Where's that at, and what year was it?
Ecook is Nushagak in Bristol Bay, set netting over there, and that would have been 1980 or 80, maybe 81. Might have been 81. That was my first year up there, and the neighbor's son-in-law was raised in Dillingham and lived down in California at that time, and had a set net site there, family sites with a bunch of the family on the beach there, truck sites, and he bought us a '66 Chevy Nova, and he handed us the keys, three of us, and said, "I'll see you in Dillingham." And we drove the Alcan up and ended up driving up to Anchorage. First time up the Alcan, obviously, at 15 or 16 years old, and flew out to Dillingham, and then over to Ecook, and started set netting. So my first 5 years fishing were pretty much Bristol Bay, Ecook Beach for Mike, and then for Tommy and Dennis Ball over there.
Can you paint the picture of?
So you're driving down the beach in a truck, laying your net out. You got an anchor out. It's about as far as you can get it. Different rules on all the different beaches, but laying your net out on the beach, running a line out from pegs on the beach to a pulley on your anchor that's as far out towards low tide as you can get it, and back up to another set of pegs and another pulley, and flake your net out on the beach. And when the opener opens, you tie the end of the line to the truck and start pulling and drag your net out there and catch as much as you can right there on the beach. And once the tide comes in and starts receding, you can basically come out and pick your net. So it's a lot different than the guys do it with skiffs. the skiff guys, they kind of can clean their net a lot more often. On the trucks, you're definitely more at the whim of the tide, but they're on Ecook Beach. The fish are there. You can get them some days really well.
Mm-hmm. What was your, in a set net site, you're on land. So what was your average day like when you got done fishing? What did you guys do?
Well, we had a little cabin. It was basically a bunch of, the first couple of years it was, Mike, he was an established businessman down south, an attorney, and but he had family there, so there was kind of all ages, different sites. A lot of the family had sites along the beach, so a couple of young guys, and we lived in a cabin with a diesel stove and tried to keep it warm, and ate a lot of fish because it was pretty lean years back then. We didn't have a big expense account. We had 3-wheelers on the beach, and we'd have as much fun as we could in between. And once the fishing started, it was just about getting as much sleep as you could, getting back down the beach and picking fish, loading them, going down to the creek. We'd go to Third Creek there those first couple of years and rinse the fish all off in creek water and put them in a truck and drive them up to CWF Cannery there at Ecook and make market there at Ecook.
And they'd pitch them all out of the truck and.
Oh, we'd dump them out. We'd have them mainly in totes then. I mean, it was pretty fancy if you had a truck with a dump bed on it. That was there was a couple of those on the beach, but that was pretty highfalutin back then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So how did your commercial career progress?
Well, I did that for a few years. I did that through a few years of high school, and then went to college for a couple of years and continued fishing in the summer up there for Mike's cousins, who had, or nephews, I guess, they had a little bit better sight. So I ended up working for them for about 3 years through there, and then one of those years, late in the season when the set netting was kind of over, we were in Dillingham, and I was still ready to fish a little bit, so I jumped on board with a guy who was heading to Ugashig to catch silvers on a drifter, and so we jumped on there and headed down to Ugashig to catch some silvers. And
did you know him, or did you?
I didn't know him. Just one of those acquaintances that happened, and I can't even remember where the connection came from. But I had the word out that I was willing to keep fishing, and he needed a deckhand, and so we took off from Dillingham, drove over to Naknek, Old Marco, and grabbed some nets in Naknek, and took off in the middle of the night from Naknek and got out probably about Johnson Hill, and Bernie says, "Okay, I'm going to bed." And we got a radar on here, so see that ring right there? Make sure the land stays farther than that off that ring and go that way. And that was my first time driving a boat.
This time you're probably, what, 21, 20, 22?
I wasn't even that old yet. I was still probably 19 or so, about then. Yeah, I was probably 19.
You had no idea where you were at.
I had no idea where I was at.
You've been on a set net site for 5 years.
No, not even. No clue at all where I was at. So, yeah. Here's the radar, drive south, and so we drove south, and that turned into quite the adventure.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, the captain didn't. Well, I guess he had a couple permits. One wasn't in his name, which was probably one of the reasons why he was looking for that guy so hard in Naknek that he couldn't find that was supposed to go with us. And the other one was a setnet permit. And we were down there drifting. And so we drifted for a few days, and then the troopers came out of the river one morning, and they were kind of making a beeline straight for us. I'm not exactly sure how those fish were getting sold or what permit or whatever. I was a dumb young deckhand, but back in those days it didn't matter. You were a partner. So troopers came on, and they escorted us back to Naknek.
From Ugashik.
From Ugashik, yep. One of the troopers, let's see, I think I jumped on the trooper boat. I had to go on the trooper boat with one of the troopers. One of the troopers jumped on our boat with Bernie, and we drove back to Naknek and spent a few days in jail in Naknek.
At 19.
19, back when the jail was still in Naknek with pink walls and yellow and orange jumpsuits, and they didn't really lock the door on us, but we weren't going anywhere.
So what came of it?
So the guy that I was working for in Ecuk was he was an attorney down in California, and so after a few days, I finally called my dad and said, "Dad, I'm in jail," and Dad laughed. Dad laughed and said, "Yeah. By the time I was your age, I'd been in jail a couple times, so that made that a little bit easier." But then he called Mike. Mike was also a pilot. We used to fly fish off of the beach in Ecuk, and when the cannery would close down, he had a couple ag trucks, or 3 ag trucks, I think, and we'd fly fish off the beach to Dillingham and sell them a couple thousand pounds at a time for different guys on the beach. And so he flew over when I went to court and gave the judge his glowing impressions of me as a young man and all the things. Even though he was an attorney in California, it didn't really mean anything, but the judge ended up letting me out, and I think I ended up with a $1,000 fine and some probation for a while, and then Mike flew me back to Dillingham in the ag truck, which ag truck's a single-seater. And so we used to maybe fly around a little bit in the hoppers. We'd get back and forth around just by crawling into the hopper where we'd hold the fish and, put our bags in there in between the engine and the cockpit and get around that way. But Mike at that point, Mike just passed away, so I'm not too worried about throwing him under the bus now. Rest in peace, Mike. But he knew that the FAA was in town in Dillingham, so he's like, "I can't let them see you getting out of the hopper when we get to Dillingham." And he was a pretty short guy, and so he's like, so you get in, I'll just sit on your lap, and I'll fly back to Dillingham sitting on your lap. And so I hopped in and put the seat back as far as it would go, and he crawled in and flew back to Dillingham, and I went home for that summer, and that was the end of that one.
Wow. Explain the layout of this plane. So there is like a straightforward. There would be normally have been 2 seats, front and back, right? And then the front seat was turned into a hopper.
No, so these were built for the agriculture industry. So they were single seaters, yeah. So there was a hopper. There was just a hopper, just basically like a fish hold. It actually had a hatch on the bottom you could open up. So when we'd put fish in there, you just pop the hatch on the bottom, put a tote under it, dump the fish into the tote. And it had a little hatch on the top. You could load them through. So, and that was up in front of the cockpit, little single seat cockpit, and behind the engine.
So you sat on your lap.
He sat on my lap, and we flew back to chase a couple moose around on the way.
Okay. And then, so the difference, that was your first experience drift netting.
That was my first experience drift netting.
Besides the
I liked it. I certainly learned that I had rain gear and some, I had like firefighting rain gear or some silly stuff that I was wearing on the beach set netting that had buttons on it. So that was something I learned was, you don't do that.
No, because explain what happened.
Dude, don't do that. Yeah, ripped a lot of buttons off of catching on the web when we were setting, and learned that. But
it could be way worse if it was really good twine.
Oh, it could be. Yeah. But fortunately, it wasn't that strong of buttons, I guess. So, yeah. No, I liked drifting though. I liked being on the boats. I didn't get seasick, and I enjoyed doing it. And so, yeah, I did that. So then I went back. I think I went to one more year of college. So that would have been my second year of college, which I passed most of. Skied way too much to pass the second semester. And
where'd you go to college?
Sac State. For a couple years, and then the next year went back up to ECUC again, which I think was my 5th year in ECUC. And by that time, we'd gotten four-wheelers. So four-wheelers were just coming out then instead of the three-wheelers. And so we'd gotten a four-wheeler the year before. We'd, using that a lot, towing trailers and using that to haul fish with and all the things, pretty common little set net operation. And it was pretty slow at the beginning of that next year, so we decided to get one of the old three-wheelers running. Well, it's been a couple of years since I'd run the three-wheelers, so beginning of the year we were getting one of the three-wheelers running, and I finally got it fired up, got the old Big Red going, and hopped on, and I was like, oh yeah, we're going, and forgot how to ride a three-wheeler and made it about 100 yards and rolled it and broke my collarbone. So I had to fly to Dillingham, and all they could do really is put a butterfly on you, and I ended up coming back to the beach that year and doing as much as I could one-armed for the operation and letting my shoulder heal up. And I think Dennis gave me $500 at the end of the year or something. It's like, whatever. You stuck it out. You did what you could. We didn't make a lot of money, but you tried. Here's $500, and I knew at that point I wasn't going back to college, and so.
Were you paying your own way through college?
It wasn't that hard. My dad was helping out a little bit, but it wasn't that hard back then. I think my tuition was $375 a semester, and it wasn't like kids these days have college. I mean, that was a state university, and so yeah, I was paying my way.
I didn't know if that's what you were fishing for, or if that was.
Yeah, well, I think Dad maybe was covering tuition and books or something like that, maybe helping with rent, but there wasn't a lot of extra. But I the semester before that, I'd pretty much let college go. So I really didn't know which way I was going at that point. So I ended up catching a ride with Linda Dowie, who was another one of the family who lived in Kodiak, and I would work for her occasionally. A lot of the a lot of the family over there was Seventh-day Adventists, and they would not fish on Saturdays. So when I was working, for Mike, he wouldn't fish on Saturdays, and that meant that the ones that still had their nets in the water usually did really good. So I'd work for Linda some of the Saturdays when she was having real big days. And she chartered a flight over from Kodiak every year and had an extra seat on the flight, and offered to take me back to Kodiak. And my shoulder was healing up pretty good by the end of the year, so I took her up on that and hopped on that charter flight back to Kodiak, and went back to Kodiak that year and started hitting the docks, looking for a job. And it took me a bit. Ended up working for East Point Cannery there for a little bit, doing some offloading and whatnot. Did that for a little while, and this is leading right into another story.
Okay.
You're just going to let me go, aren't you, Mark?
We're here for the stories, Tim. We are here for the stories.
Oh, this is the happy story. So I had a good buddy that actually worked for Linda, a good buddy, James Brisbane, Kodiak guy that I've been friends with for years, and met on the beach there, became good friends with. And so he lived in Kodiak, and we were hanging out, and I was working at the cannery and not super thrilled with cannery work. So he ended up buying this little skiff, about a 15-foot, 16-foot wooden skiff. Maybe had a little tiny cabin on it. I don't know, maybe a 65-horse Johnson on it or something like that. And we young and dumb and didn't know what we were doing, and it was fall time, and I was like, I'm done with this. This cannery work's not for me. And he's like, well, let's go to a Fognac. I think he had maybe he's a native guy, partial native anyway, and I think maybe he had some land out there. Definitely had a friend out there with some land that had a cabin, lived out there, homesteaded. And so he's like, well, I just bought this skiff for, whatever, $500 or $1,000. It wasn't much of a skiff. And so let's go to a Fognac. I'm like, I'm in. So quit the job, hopped in. Happy was the name of the skiff. Whoever the previous owner was had it painted on the side there. And so we hopped in Happy and took off on a nice day and loaded up with, I don't know, a couple cases of beer and a couple cans of beans or whatever it was, and took off out of Kodiak Harbor, and we're heading to a Fognac, and we got out in front of Uzinki there, not quite to Whale Pass, and we got out in front of Uzinki, and the outboard took a dive on us. So it was still a nice day. We weren't worried about anything. We were maybe too young and dumb to worry about anything. But so we were out in front of Uzinki and bobbing around and probably opened a beer. What else is there to do? And
no radio.
And I don't think we had a radio. We might have had a handheld, possibly. That would have been about it. I don't remember a radio at the time, though, but we're drifting around out there, and one of these Zinky natives, they got a speedboat, kind of a little speedboat thing that they would run to town and not, ended up coming by and waved them down, and they towed us into Uzinki, and so we went in there, and they tied us up to the dock there, and we're tied up to the dock in Uzinki, and just waiting to see what happens. And it just so happens that the very last seiner from the west side of Kodiak decided to stop in New Zinke on their way back to Kodiak. And I'm talking, this was fall time. This was getting late. It was, he told, he's like, I'm the last guy coming back this way. And he ended up tying to the dock there for a minute. I don't know if he knew somebody. So he ended up putting us in tow and drug us back to Kodiak. And got us back to Kodiak, took us out, put us in Dog Bay, and we made it over to the transient slip there at Dog Bay. And there's a couple little, I mean, hard to call them bunks, but we called them bunks on this little skiff, right? It had a little tiny cabin on it. And so it was the middle of the night, and we got there, and we tied her up to the float, and went to bed. And that was good. And in the morning, I remember waking up and stretching out a little bit and flopping my arm over the side of the bunk and splashing. We had about, I don't know, skiff was filling up with water. So we got up that morning, we pumped the skiff out. We called up James's dad, who had the trailer, brought the trailer down, paddled the skiff over, got it on the trailer, and drug it out to get her back on land. And okay, that was an adventure that didn't work out.
Nobody got hurt.
Nobody got hurt. It was all good. And now we needed to figure out something else to do. So we ended up going down to Solly's, which was the kind of the local restaurant, breakfast place down there in the mall in Kodiak, and having breakfast and trying to figure out what we're going to do with our lives. And as we're having breakfast, we're like, I wonder when the ferry goes to Dutch. And I was like, oh, I don't know, let's find out. It sounds like a reasonable option. So I went over to the payphone and called up the ferry office, and the ferry only goes to Dutch 5 times a year in the summer or something. That was the Tustamina. I don't even know if they go out there anymore, but they did back then. And so once a month or so in the summer. And so I called up the ferry office and said, hey, when does the ferry go to Dutch? And they said, 2 o'clock. I was like, today? Yeah, today. And so we finished breakfast. We went and grabbed a cab, hired a cab, ran around, got all of our shit together, and hopped on the ferry to Dutch Harbor. And that's kind of how it all started.
So we're going to Dutch.
We're going to Dutch.
All right.
So we're going to Dutch Harbor. Hop on the Tustamina, the old trusty Rusty, and making a couple stops out the way. Had a case of beer, bottle of Rumpelmans. We knew it was going to be a few-day drive. And
few-day drive. Oh, on the ferry.
On the ferry, yeah. It was going to be a way out. We didn't have a room or anything. We were general seating up there on the top with a few other wanderers like us, and making stops along the way. I think we stopped in Chignik and Cold Bay and all the things, and of course, we were making friends with a case of beer and a bottle of Rumpelmans, and the stewards ended up confiscating the rest of the alcohol probably first night, maybe second night. They gave it to us when we got off the boat in Dutch Harbor, but we met a couple friends. Bill the Cat, he was one. He'll come into play later in the stories, but and then we pulled up to the fuel dock there, city dock in Dutch Harbor in the middle of the night. I think it was about midnight or something, and we're looking. I'd never been to Dutch Harbor. I think James maybe had made a quick stop there on a crab season the year before, which was maybe his first crab season on the Sleeve. I was looking right, looking left. There's lights this way, there's lights that way, and didn't know where to go. And so we just walked across the street and went behind the fuel tanks there and found a couple pallets to throw away, put our pup tent up, and threw some sleeping bags out, and spent the rest of the night right there across from the city dock, and got up the next morning and started hitting the docks looking for a job. And took us a while. Wandered the docks. It was right before king crab season, but only a few days, so it was pretty tough. I think we had maybe 5 or 6 days before fleet was leaving for king crab, and got a job, rigging gear for guys, helping out and stuff, but ended up not getting a king crab job. Ended up living in a bunker out on the spit, and big muddy pit on the bottom. We found some old trawl web to make a hammock and string across the bunker, and put our pup tent on it, and burn cans of sterno to keep warm, and eat PB&Js and all the things while we're hitting the dock every day, looking for work. And then the king crab fleet left, and we didn't have jobs, and got a couple jobs packing fish meal off of the processors for just day stuff, make a couple bucks, and starting to feel pretty broke, and needing to get a little better situation. So we ended up taking jobs as processors on a CP trawler, and made it, left the dock there. And this is the Bill the Cat story. So we ended up going, we're both, James and I and Bill the Cat, who we met there on the ferry, all ended up taking jobs on the Rebecca Irene, and we went out and were just in the factory processing, and we were the new guys on the boat, and they put us way in the back of this 30-man stateroom or whatever it was up in the bow, and nobody'd wake us up for breakfast. And so one morning, I'm like, this is probably a week or two in, I went to the assistant foreman, I'm like, nobody wakes us up in the morning, and we never get to eat breakfast. I'm like, we just need to be woken up. Happy to get up, just somebody's got to wake us up. This is, we're working 18 and 6 in the factory. You got no alarm clock with me, right? I mean, what do you want us to do? And they'd wake everybody else up, and new guys in the back they didn't care about. So the assistant foreman says, all right, yeah, I totally get it. Just wait for everybody else to come back from breakfast, and run upstairs and grab whatever's left. And so I was like, great. So everybody gets back from their rotation. The guys that were in the middle of their shift got on, and then dipped out, went up, grabbed breakfast, and the factory foreman comes into the galley ranting and raving and fires us. You're fired. I'm like, okay, this is freaking weird. At this point, I'm like, I don't even give a shit. This is a freaking chaos scene here. And so we're fired, and went back to the bunk. And okay, well, I guess we're just riding the bunk until we get back to town. And we did that for a few days, and actually the skipper on there was a pretty interesting guy, and he talked to us, and I'd go hang out with him a little bit, and learned a lot of things about him, and ended up going out and helping the deckhands and learning how to mend web a little bit, and just trying to do something on the boat, even though they fired us, so it was kind of hard to just do nothing all day. And then Bill the cat, that's where he comes back into play. He quits. He finds a way to break into the C-stores and get a bottle of booze out of the C-stores, and ends up getting most of that bottle of booze down, decides he wants to go home, and he goes and opens up a panel and takes a Victronox and cuts through as many wires as he could find, trying to sabotage the boat to get us to go back to town. And unfortunately, I think it was mainly communications wires. So they figured that out. They locked him in the paint locker for a couple days, and he ended up being a pretty good deckhand later on. I'd never worked with him again, but I know other guys that hired him, and they were happy with him in the end. But one of those rare types that you, or actually common types that you find in Dutch Harbor, I guess. So we went and did that, and got back to the dock, and shaking our heads at how we got into this, and felt a little vindicated when the owner met us at the dock and cleaned house, basically fired all the officers on the boat, and we realized that, okay, this is not the way that the operation's supposed to work in a streamlined deal. So, only job I've ever been fired from in my life, and
what were you actually fired for?
I don't really know. I think leaving the factory, I guess, even though the assistant foreman, had said, yeah, go grab breakfast. The foreman and the assistant obviously weren't on the same page, so it was chaos on that boat. It was a mess back then. They like I said, owner cleared house when we got on the boat, and they started over. They had a reset going on there, because there was some. So that was my first experience on the big boat. So I was like, okay, well, that's not what I was looking for. And so we're back in Dutch Harbor again, moving into the Eagle Inn, which was basically a couple containers that acted as a motel there back then. And started hitting the docks again, and then ended up getting a job on the Shashalden, going out and single potting brown crab on Stalemate Bank, which is would be the next island past Attu if it got to the surface, but so way out there, way out there, and single potting brown crab, which is not optimal way to brown crab.
Well, they're deep.
They're deep, yeah. So 5, 6, 7 shots, and
have
probably
a coffee break while you're hauling it.
Probably still just getting the ones that are the shallow ones at that point. Didn't make a bunch there, but tried it out. It was a little CP. The Shashalden had a little process factory on there, a couple cookers.
Were you in the process part, or were you deckhand, or?
Yeah, kind of both.
Combi.
Kind of both. I was kind of a combi guy. They had a process foreman. My buddy James actually got on the boat as well. He was a deckhand, and I was kind of the floater guy. I went back and forth between process and deck work, and started to get my first taste of hauling pots.
All right.
Yeah. So did that until close to Christmas. Came back in, and I don't know, didn't make a whole bunch of money there either. But at least got a paycheck when I got home. I don't know. It was meager. It was $900, I think, if I remember right. But
well, $900, and you're talking mid '80s at this point, right?
Late
87, 88.
Yeah, about 87 probably, 87. So it was enough to tide me over for a month probably at that point, at least, if not 2. And I think I went home for Christmas, and I'd made some good connections, met some people, and then got a call, or can't remember, got a phone number or whatever, and ended up getting a job on the Rondies to go brown crabbing, longlining, the proper way. And had to go to Newport for a couple months and do shipyard in Newport for a couple months on the Rondies. So yeah, Rondies was really my introduction into the crab fishery. I did a little taster on the Shashalden, and then worked for Dave Capri on the Rondies, and that was really my introduction into what crab fishing was all about. And I was longline and brown crab, so I really didn't have a real good sense of what the single pot fishery was all about at that point. But we worked hard, we processed, we had I think it was 7 of us total on board, and we would fish, live tank them, and then anytime the tides were strong or the weather would come up, we'd process them all and run back out and start fishing again. And it was a grind. We were stupid. we worked so hard. We as a crew, we decided what our rotation would be, and I think we finally got rid of it. But at one time, we decided that we were going to work a 12-2 rotation, because that worked out with how the strings were hauled. Those basically would take us a couple hours to haul a string, and so yeah, we were working 12 hours on, 2 hours off for a while. It was the dumbest rotation I've ever been on. We figured that out after a while. We got to make the choice on how we did that. We'd basically have, I guess, just one. I guess maybe we had 2 guys I think just one guy in the rack at all times, and then Dave would he'd just stay awake in the wheelhouse for 76 days on end or whatever it was. Maybe you have to go wake him up every once in a while, but we just keep hauling gear and processing crab and making pretty good money, getting paid on finished price of brown crab, and that was my first taste of actually making a little bit of money in the fisheries.
What was a little bit of money?
Yeah, what was that? I want to say, God, that was a long time ago, Mark. But I want to say it was 3-month trips, about maybe a little less than 3 months each. I did a couple back-to-backers, and I want to say that first trip was like 45 grand, and I think Dave's brother Tommy ran it on the next trip. We didn't do quite as well, but
Dave needs to sleep.
Still, yeah. He might have needed a break. And yeah, so I'd actually followed, or I'd met a guy there, Buck Fowler, who was going to be the relief on there and had been the relief on there in the past, and that's where I met Buck. And then I ended up after the Rondies chasing Buck around on a few different boats trying to get to Russia, because that was kind of where Buck was at. He was running boats, and he really wanted to go get a taste of those Russian crab. And right at that point, I think the Diomedes was the only one over there actually fishing crab in Russia, the only American boat. But a lot of the guys were trying to get a piece of that and get into that. So there was a lot of stories. Oh, we're going to Russia. And so I actually ended up jumping ship off the Rondies and following Buck over to the Penguin, and then over to the Arctic Orion, and then eventually the Pacific Orion, and then finally making it over to Russia. By that time, I'd gone and got my mate's license, and so I went over as first mate. We actually left. We were on 100 average on Bear Die when we got the call, fishing right between the islands there, between St. Paul and St. George, and doing really well on Baird Eye, and got the call to go to Russia, and we had, I think it was in November, mid-November or something, and we had till the end of the year to catch, I can't remember, but it was at least a boatload. It was about a boatload of red king crab in Russia, if we could get it by the end of the year. So
everybody had visas, all that stuff was...
Oh, you didn't need a visa. They made that. Well, I mean, we maybe did, but the company dealt with all that stuff. I don't even know if I had a passport back then. It was we didn't get off the boat. We took we stacked all the gear. We scrambled the Dutch harbor. We offloaded. We put a bunch of fiber and salt and bait on board, and a pallet of booze for the Russians. The
Russians.
Oh yeah, because we had to get a couple Russian inspectors on there, and it was kind of known that you had inspectors on there. You needed to make sure the inspectors were happy. So we loaded up and headed over and got over there, picked up a couple in the Kuril Islands there, pulled into one of the ports there in the Kuril Islands, and they brought a couple inspectors out to us, and we went up into the Sea of Okhotsk and started setting red crab pots. And
with you had no idea where you were at.
No, I mean,
the captain, you never fished there before.
No, nobody'd ever fished there before. I mean, just started throwing pots out. Like, this is our zone. This is what you got the quota for this zone here. I think there's 3 or 4 zones up along the Kamchatka Peninsula on the west side there in the Sea of O, and we were down there on the bottom. I can't remember what the name of the zones were, but we were on that bottom zone just north of the Kurils, and started throwing them out in king crab depths, and they started coming back just checker block full. Like, it didn't take us long, and we were on them where you could not fit another king crab in some of those pots. It was just full. So we loaded that boat. We kept the factory full. I mean, the factory was backed up, so I think we could do 600 boxes a day or something on that, 700 boxes a day, maybe 45-pound boxes on that boat, if I remember right. And
now, back then, were they doing the blocks of meat, or was it?
No, we were doing sections.
Okay.
We were doing sections.
The bricks of gold.
The bricks of gold. They were, yeah. And, you think bricks of gold, and then you look at the prices they're getting these days.
There was a time when they would take all the meat out of them.
Oh, right, yeah.
And pack them in little bricks.
Well, the Russians were still doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians were still doing that on a lot of their processors, but we were doing American style sections. And so we did have a lot of barnacles. There were crab hadn't been harvested, not by Americans. At that point the Russians had some Japanese influence, but that was all fish in small pots, and the Americans are the best crab fishermen. There's a lot of. We're not the best longliners, maybe. We're not the best seiners. We're not the best a lot of things. There's a lot of countries that have their specialties. The Japanese are phenomenal longliners. The Portuguese are great seiners. All the things. But nobody catches crab like the Americans did. At least at that time, we were way far ahead. So we were going over there, and we were putting up numbers. We were putting up crab that was, the numbers we were putting up were more than the Russians were putting up in a month. We could put up in a day, almost. Something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it was just staggering how efficient we were at we were at crab fishing compared to that. So that was a full American crew. We just had the 2 Russian inspectors.
Who were drunk all the time.
Which you didn't really know. We didn't really know they were drunk all the time until one day we had out in the back of the wheelhouse, had the pallet of booze all, tied up there, and, cardboard tote tied back there. And then one day the tote just collapsed because it was empty. Nobody even knew that they were getting into it. They knew it was there. Pretty soon it was gone.
Nice.
But they would just, they'd come and do their daily work and get back to their stateroom, and yeah, it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive how those guys can drink. So so then finally made it over to Russia and got that in there.
So was it the one trip?
So I did that one trip. Then we came back to the States and then did Opie's. I think I went home for the first trip of Opie's and then came back for the second trip of Opie's or something like that year. And we fished Opie's back in the States. And then the boats went back over to Russia again. And then that next trip was the first time I flew over to Russia and did a crew transfer over there, and flew over to Magadan, and that was the first time the company had done a crew transfer over there. So we flew into Magadan. Was it Magadan? Yeah, it was Magadan. So we flew into Magadan, and Bill McVeigh and I don't think Mark came, but this was Pomar Fisheries, notorious Pomar. But Bill came over, and maybe a couple other of the office people came over to make sure it was all going to go well, and they were herding us like cattle, and okay, we're doing this, and they'd taken us to the hotel and had a big meal for us at the hotel, and I was like, I'm not staying in a hotel. I'm in a foreign country, my first time. I'm like, I want to see what the hell's going on. So I'm like, I'm gonna go walk around, and Bill's freaking out. And I'm like, Bill, I'm not staying in a hotel. I'm
going to the bar.
Well, I'm going somewhere. No, I just went. I'm like, there's a dock down there, right? We're in this hotel that's kind of like down the beach. It's kind of nowhere near anything, and there's a town up there, Magadan. It's all a bunch of gray brick buildings, and back that way. But there's a dock down the beach. I'm like, I'm just gonna walk down to the beach and see what's going on the dock, see what the other fishing boats are doing, and so I ended up going and taking off and walking down the dock, and I think maybe one other guy went with me. I can't remember who. And I walked down I don't know, probably half mile away, and walked down to the dock and tried to talk to some people that I couldn't communicate with. I mean, this was just right after the wall fell, so this is, they're not speaking much English there. We certainly weren't speaking any Russian yet. And walked down there, and people were friendly, and we can't communicate though, and all that. So it's still daylight out, and ended up walking, starting to walk back, and we get about halfway back, and there's a couple Russians there having a bonfire on the beach, and we stopped along the beach, and we spent half the night drinking vodka with these guys, and I'd trading sweatshirts. I ended up with one of those blue and white like Russian sailor shirts that I traded for like an Alaska ship sweatshirt or something with one of the Russians, and had a great time, and trying to communicate as best we could with almost no verbal skills in either language, and Yep, ended up back at the hotel with a Russian on each shoulder, making sure I got home safe, and Bill's still up waiting for us, freaking out. Just one of those once in a lifetime experiences. Sure. that worked out great, and then I went out and we that was the first time we had Russian crew. So we went out with all American crew the first time. And then that time it was just, I think, 4 or 5 of us. We had a captain, a mate, a deck boss, a process foreman, and an engineer that were American. And then we would have all the rest of the crew was Russian. All with titles, but basically all processors. They just all processed, whether they were, I think even the captains processed some of them at that point, because they didn't have anything else to do. They didn't understand how we were fishing. They all
had titles. Explain that.
They were, so you had a Russian captain, you had a Russian first mate, second mate, third mate, Russian chief engineer, first engineer, second engineer, electrical engineer, refrigeration engineer, radar operator, all the things, because that was the way they did it in Russia, right? You had the bosun's mate, you had all the other mates. I mean, I don't think there was a single just deckhand on the boat. You didn't get that job if you were just a deckhand in Russia. You got that job because you had some sort of title, but you ended up just being a processor.
But the captain wasn't the captain.
The captain was not the captain, but we were required to carry them.
We were required to have a
required to have a Russian captain on board, and he would do the reporting to the Russian government for what our catch reporting and all that stuff. And he was basically the only one. The only other guys they were smart guys, right? They just didn't really have much function on a American style crab boat. But every once in a while, a guy like the electrical engineer he'd save us. I remember one time, I can't remember what broke down, but one of those guys, was tearing apart like freaking ghetto blaster we had to repair something, right? Just for pulling diodes out of it or something. These guys were all very educated in their fields, but that was sort of the Russian style, was that, everybody had very specific task, and
but they were processing.
But all we needed them for was processing most of the time, so they were all just processors. And then we had in the beginning, it was like I said, this is right after the wall fell. These guys weren't used to working; they didn't understand capitalism, and so we figured out really quickly, okay, they're not really willing to work very hard. And so I think it might have been the first trip or the second trip, we got some cash sent over, and we paid these guys, basically it was about $2,000 for a trip in $100 bills, American $100 bills. And we fired a couple. And all of a sudden, things changed. These guys were like, okay, we're ready to work now. Because basically that would, for a couple grand, they could buy an apartment in Russia. So, it was really good money for them. So then that worked out really well. And it only took a few trips to where we really had some quality. We were able to get rid of the chafe and ended up with some really good quality Russian crews over there.
How long did you do that?
Well, I did that for a couple years. And then I ended up back working. I ran the Second Island for a little while, the Blue Canoe for a couple years, crabbing.
Blue Canoe.
The Blue Canoe.
Golden Dawn now.
No, the Sitkan Island. It's mothballed now. It's a buyback vessel.
Okay.
It was an old like minesweeper, super narrow, 155 foot. I think it was like Kona, or at one point, I don't know. It had a couple names, but anyway, it was a crab boat that never should have been. It was fine. It was 155 feet long, and you could pack 120 pots on it or something. It was not a stellar version of a crab boat, but it was my first. That was my first crab captain's job. I had run a tender. My first tender job was when I was 25. Was running the Westward. I did that.
It's running around here now.
It's still around. I see it every.
Like every couple days.
Yeah,
I see it.
yeah. Old Woodville was in the worst storm of my life on that boat.
We're gonna get to that.
All right. Well, maybe not the worst storm, but the worst storm on the worst boat. We did that. I did that. I came back. I ran boats. I ran that Sitkan Island for a couple of years back in the States. And then I went back over to Russia running it was the old Jacqueline R. Well, actually, no, I started out on the Sarlay, I guess, which was I went back over running it was a Russian medium-sized trawler. It was like 180 foot Russian trawler.
You were running it for a Russian company then?
No, I was running it for an American company, but it was a Russian trawler that got the factory and the deck got converted at Marco, and the rest of it was all Russian. And
so it was a U.S. flagged vessel at that time?
No, it wasn't.
I'm getting confused.
So I ran this back in Russia again. So it was a boat that came over here. The company bought a Russian boat, brought it over to Marco, did the factory and the deck, redid American style at Marco, and then took it back to Russia to fish.
Okay. So
went over there, running that boat and it was ice class boat. But it had a variable pitch prop on it, and we were running single pots. It was again not a stellar crab boat, but we did okay. But we didn't end up with a lot of quota on there. We thought we had quota.
I didn't even know the Russians had quota, to be honest.
Yeah, they had quota. It was very, very. There's a lot of politics in that. So if you didn't have a company that was up on Russian politics, you didn't end up with quota.
Yeah.
So, but you definitely had to end up with quota.
I've only had one other guy on the show that fished in Russia.
Oh yeah,
Joe Morris.
Oh yeah. Oh Joe.
You probably know Joe.
Yeah.
Joe Morris.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Joe. Yeah.
Well, stay in your story.
Anyway, it might have been the guy that I swapped out with. No, that was.
I feel like he was on.
No.
I feel like he was on the Billiken or the Bountiful.
Joe was. It was a Joe, but I can't remember what his last name was now. So I went over there I was over there on the Ottoman, and I went over there. The Russian they had a Russian captain that took it over there because I was still fishing Opies or something. And so when the boat got done in Marco, the Russian captain took it over there. He ended up like down by Hawaii, trying to go around a storm or something. It took forever. I ended up going to Mogadon. Oh, we're getting diverted here again to another story.
That's what I live for.
All right. Yeah, I know you like these, Mark, so we're going to keep going. So I fly over to Mogadon.
Again, Because that's where you flew before. So
Yeah,
now
this
you're a
is this
veteran.
is now
Now
that
you're a
I was
veteran.
going as mate the last time. That was when we first started going over to Russia. This is 4 or 5 years later.
You're the captain.
Different boat. I'm going over as captain. I fly over to take this Russian converted boat over, and I fly into Mogadon, and we're supposed to helicopter out to the boat when the Russian captain gets the boat from Seattle over there. And we go out to the airport every day, and the weather's horrible, and so I guess I wasn't fishing opies. Maybe I was doing king crab or bear dye or something, because we end up going to the airport every day, can't get out. This is like for weeks, week and a half probably. Ended up just about feeling like I finally was needed to get the crew out of town, because they were starting to get the locals a little riled up. A couple of the local establishments. So finally,
Is this in Dutch?
this is in Mogadon.
Oh, okay. Oh,
This is in Mogadon. And which, man, you're going out to some of those establishments and you don't know who you're playing with there. Some of those guys felt like they were Russian mafioso, right? Not wanting to make problems with the Americans. Fortunately, I think we got some passes there that we probably didn't deserve. But we went, so we ended up leaving on New Year's Eve in the morning on a Russian freighter that was leaving Mogadon. That was probably the last boat of the year to get out of Mogadon before the ice rolled in. And so we hop on this boat, and they're like, okay, we can't get out on a helicopter. We're going to just hop on this boat. We're going to get out there. We leave on this boat, and we go out, and we're breaking through the ice to get out of Mogadon, and about every 4 hours, the boat shuts down, and they got to clear the ice out of all the sea strainers, and making bits and pieces of that, and this is New Year's Eve, like morning, I think, or maybe the day before, but by the time we're still out, they're finally going to get through the ice, and then Russian captain invites us up into his stateroom, and we realize we're shutting down. It's New Year's, and it's like, that's the way we do it here. We shut down, and there's a couple gals on board that are cooks, and all of a sudden they got their fancy black dresses on, and everybody's got their best on. The boat's shut down. We're sitting in the captain's cabin, and serving us. One of the interesting things about Russians, and there'll be a bottle of vodka on that table. We're sitting there up in the captain's cabin, and bottle of vodka in the middle of the table. Nobody touches the bottle of vodka until the food shows up. And then it's a little bit of food and vodka.
A lot of vodka.
A little bit of food, a lot of vodka. And so that went on throughout the night. So we spent just a hoot-hollering, really fun night, just partying with the Russians.
How was the communication at that point?
Well, I'd been over there for a little bit, so I had, boat Russian. I mean, very weak, right? I mean, enough
Boat Russian.
enough words that I could communicate a little bit with deckhands. I could count by that point, right? I could get my counts and that kind of thing, but I would definitely never became fluent. And the Russians had us over there for a while, that they were starting to learn. So usually you could get a conversation, a little bit of a conversation going, but it would take you a long time. but you could make it happen.
Well, there's vodka involved.
Yeah, well, and there's vodka involved. So, yeah, does anybody really know what they're saying anyway? So we did that, and then we got out. Finally, we got out, and we got on the boat, and ended up not having a lot of quota. We didn't get the king crab we wanted. It went away. We ended up having a single pot opies for a while. So I spent about 2.5 months on that boat without much quota. Ended up, having to do a lot of drift time because we didn't have quota. Ended up fishing single pots for opies and, maybe 100, 150 a pot if it was good, and just not really making much money. And so when that kind of dried up, that whole thing dried up, and they were like, okay, we just got to send this boat to Korea, right? We're not getting the quota for it. We're going to keep the other boat fishing. So that was the old Jacqueline R, which became the Ottoman, I think. And so the guy who was running that boat was ready to get off, and they were going to send my boat down. So we tied up. I jumped over. So I swapped boats with Joe. I can't remember what his last name was, but I think it was Joe. And so I ended up spending about 5.5 months at sea without ever being within 12 miles of land on 2 different boats. And then I got onto the Ottoman, and Joe hadn't had quota in a while either, and 2 days after, I had the best crab job in the world. And that was a year when I think it was a 12-day Opie season in the States, and it was really slow over here. And 2 days after I swapped boats with Joe, I had like 600 tons of king crab to catch in Russia.
Oh, man.
And
Now, you weren't on a daily rate, right? You were on a share.
I was not on a daily. I did have a guarantee. We ended up finally getting a guarantee on the other boat because the crew was going to hell because we were drifting and doing nothing and nobody was making any money. And so they finally ended up giving us a daily rate on the other boat. And then I jumped over onto the Ottoman and got the quota. And so I had 600 tons of red and blue crab quota to catch.
1.2 million pounds.
Lots. Yes. And so then I did a little red crab. I chased the red crab for a while down in the lower districts. The ice was, this was kind of, by this time it's probably March, maybe late March even. And the ice was kind of keeping us down lower, and those lower districts by that time had been chewed up a little bit more, and we were doing some pretty good red crab catches, but nothing super special. And then finally lost them. Spent a few days, couldn't find anything. Ended up frying a generator. We were actually doing a really good job chasing this school of red crab at like 6 miles a day and keeping on them and making it happen. But it was the only thing going on. And then we fried a generator, and we couldn't keep up in the factory. Got to be where we couldn't even keep fishing. We just didn't have enough generation capacity.
Had to clean up what you had.
So we finished up. We drifted around, waited for parts to come out of Korea. Finally, the parts showed up. We got the generator rebuilt, and we couldn't find those red crab again. So we decided to go up for some of our blue crab, which were up in that bay way at the north end of the Sea of Okhotsk. And that was, there's some blue crab up there. I'd fished a little bit of them before. We went up for those. We decided to go, okay, let's just stack it all on. We'll run up here into this bay and see if we can find some of these blue crab. And we basically had half the bay to work with. Half of it was the Kamchatka district. The other half was the Magadan district. So we had a line going up the middle of this bay, and we decided, we're like, okay, well, the ice is thinning up a little bit. It's later in the season. Let's see if we can get up there. And so we started chugging up there, and we hit ice and pushed our way through it slowly and got some clear spots and pushed our way up and got some clear spots and pushed our way up. And finally we got up into this bay and had fairly clear waters up there, and we set pots and 100 plus
Of blues?
of blue crab. So just like plenty good to keep the factory backed up. We're like, okay, we're on it. And so we start fishing, and the Russian captain who's got to report, he's like, do you want me to report this? Because he's got to report it on the radio, right? Which means everybody else in the fleet, all the Russian guys, all the other Americans, everybody can hear what we're catching. And I'm like, yeah, just report it, whatever. It'll be fine. Just report it. And so he's like, okay. And so he's reporting. Well, right at that time, it starts blowing westerly, and all the ice from in front of Mogadon went over and put a cork in that bay. And so we sat up there and loaded the boat with blue crab, and not another
Nobody
boat
could
could get to us because it just got completely corked off with ice. And we loaded the boat, and the last couple days the crab moved over the line into the Mogadon district, and it slowed down a little bit, and we ended up seeing the first boat that got to us, I think, a day before we were full. And we steamed out of there with a checker block full boat of blue crab for everybody. That was a fun one.
You got to be a millionaire, Tim.
Oh, no. Well, they didn't pay us that good back then. If we were catching those crab now, we didn't make that kind of money back then. We did not make
$45,000 at 25 years old on the Rondies, hauling 8-string brown crab pots in 3 months.
Yeah. You know, fisherman, we could piss it away so well.
I know where my first
and I tried to quit so many times.
I know
too,
where my
right?
first one went. I know where my first one went.
I did buy a house after that, after the Rondies deal. So I bought my first house, a duplex, and set me on some sort of path towards independence. Responsibility. But then I went and I would go travel, and I would
Sure.
find ways to not be a millionaire.
So after all the Russian experience, what did you come back here in crab?
I came back, after all the Russian stuff. Well, I tried quitting. I tried quitting a couple times. It never quite worked out. I moved to Hawaii. For a while, I might have been in Hawaii during those last Russian trips, living over there, and I had a little 21-foot whaler, and I was fishing handline and ikashibi, ahi, tuna over there, and funnest fishery in the world. I mean, God, if a guy could just make a living at it, I'd never do anything else. Just an absolute gas. So basically, go out. I'd basically have dinner with the family, and then I'd take off. I'd go grab my boat and launch it at the boat ramp and head out at whatever 8, 9 at night, and go set a chute and drop a light down under the boat. And
What's a chute?
Just a parachute, like a sea anchor, but we just used like old parachutes, and throw it off just so it holds you with the current, and then drop a light underneath and start throwing anchovies and sardines or whatever over the side and chumming, and dropping 4 different lines down, couple float lines, couple deep lines, with baited up with ikashibi is basically Ika is squid in Japanese, and shibi is tuna. So it's basically using squid for bait, but we'd use squid and anchovies and sardines and rapello and all kinds of things to get the big yellowfins. Yeah, so the target was usually like the 100+ yellowfins off the coast of Kona.
And you can't make a living off a 100-pound yellowfin?
No, because when they come in, the price goes to hell. Like, they all come. They all, yeah. When they
the
come,
first guy gets paid.
Yeah, exactly. You always get a good trip or two, and sometimes you don't catch too, and you go out and you spend money and you don't catch, and it's just, I always said, if a guy could go over there and like pay for his house, pay for his, if he had enough money to go over there and just pay for his house, pay for his car, all the bait, all the stuff that a guy needs to be able to pay for, you could probably make a living. You could put food on the table, you could, buy bait and gas and all the things, but to get ahead at all, it was just a real struggle. But it was a fun thing to do in between, and literally the funnest fishery ever. Handline, I mean, we were handlining them. I mean, I didn't have a hauler on the boat. I mean, I'm catching 200-pound tuna by hand. I hauled a 212 up one time and got her over the rail and into the boat by myself without anybody else on the boat. I was sore for a week, but man, that was just a gas.
Yeah. Okay, so where did you go after the Russian fishery? What was your next adventure? Because clearly you've had a lot of them.
I don't even remember necessarily what the timeline was on all of them, but I definitely have done a couple different things. I was always chasing the adventure a little bit. Probably would have been better off just finding a good paying job and sticking with it, and probably would have made my retirement come a little bit earlier, but instead I always looked for, something fun to do. And so I did, I guess maybe it was in between the two stints in Russia. I ran crab boats down in Mexico off the coast of Baja, doing Cancer John Garthy's, which are stone crab, and harvesting claws on them. We harvested the whole crab initially, and then found that it was just really, really challenging to get them in alive. We were having massive dead loss, so that didn't last for too long. Even with short trips, we would have up to 30% dead loss. We just couldn't keep them alive because of the warm surface water, I think. And we tried chilling, we tried aerating. Never really found the secret sauce to be able to keep the crab alive once we got them up. So that kind of fizzled after a little bit, and then another company jumped in with I think it's a Pacific Breeze. I think maybe it was one of the Ness brothers boats that they built that ended up down there. It was like a 90-foot catcher processor, double decker, perfect boat for the fishery, and basically I went and pioneered that stone crab fishery off the coast of Baja. Probably caught more of those stone crab than anybody off the coast there, and we ended up harvesting just the claws. And then
doesn't sound good.
Putting them back.
Sounds like,
and they'd regrow.
Oh, okay. I was like, this is going bad.
Yeah.
This is going bad fast.
No, they regrow, and so we went down there for first few years. I think it was about 2 or 3 years. We went down there on a science permit, And so we'd have a couple Mexican scientists on board at all times, and they would do the research. And basically, I think the company paid for University of Washington to run the data that the scientists collect to find out whether it was a viable fishery or not. And then in the end, they awarded the company a permit.
Did you have to feed them tequila?
No.
You had the Russians vodka.
No, not so much. The
Inappropriate
Mexican,
question, I guess.
no, not so much. I mean, the Mexican guys were a little more serious. Actually, the Mexican scientists were a little more serious than the Russian guys, for sure. And it was a fun fishery. It was a fun fishery for sure. I really enjoyed it. And they did award us in the end. They ran the data and they awarded us that, and the crab would grow their claws. Is
there still a quota for that now today?
There is. I don't know that anybody's fishing it anymore. It was a challenge to make viable. I think that particular boat was kind of perfectly suited for it. The company was maybe mismanaged a bit. The boat went to the dogs a little bit. It didn't get upkept, and last time I saw it, would have taken a lot to get it back going. I think the fishery's viable. We never really found the extremities of the resource. We were fishing basically southern Baja from about halfway down Baja to a little bit below San Carlos. So there was a stretch of crab in there that could be harvested, but we never found out whether they went farther.
It'd be hard for me to keep a recreational pole out of the water in those waters.
Oh, we just dragged 1,000-pound test mono with the lure on it, and hook whatever in between strings and throw the lure over, and striped marlin or a yellowtail or ahi or mahi or whatever. And it was the first time, one of the first times we caught something. I was like, asked the Mexican crew member guys, I was like, hey, how about some ceviche? Anybody know how to make ceviche? And one of the guys jumps, oh, I'll make ceviche. And I walk down to the galley, and he's cutting up the fish and onions and peppers and all kinds of stuff, and he just takes the French's yellow mustard and just starts going to town with yellow mustard. I'm like, that sounds like the weirdest ceviche ever. Oh, delicious. It was just absolutely great.
You know, French's mustard can go on anything. I mean, really.
I would have never thought.
You never had a mustard sandwich? All right, what's the next fishery? Because you've had a few.
So that one, I don't know. Like I said, the timeline. A friend of mine was talking about maybe investing in a swordfish fishery, a catcher processor that was going to do swordfish and tuna, and so he talked me into going out as mate, and we did a Central Pacific run, left Coos Bay, Oregon, and drove south to the equator, and then west, and ended up a couple months later on Christmas Island, going and out on Johnson Atoll, fishing sharks, and did all kinds of crazy things that just experimental. Just trying to figure out how to pay for a boat in the Central Pacific, and it was he ended up not investing in that, which I think was a good call. But I kind of did that one as a favor for him, and then I went down with another friend of mine, did the golden crab fishery down in Florida, and so I went down there and built a bunch of crab pots for him, and went out and caught golden crab in the south of the Keys there in Florida. No, they're their own species.
Not like an Alaska golden?
No, they're not. I don't know. They're kind of a combination. I don't know, maybe somewhere between a dungy and a stone crab or something. They're really delicious crab. They're really good flavor. Really cool crab, and we actually did pretty well at them. And then the Gulf Stream moved, and that Gulf Stream, if you've never experienced that, it's a phenomenon of nature, and it basically just swung over our gear, and our gear was gone. And so we never quite figured out how to manage that current down there, because that seemed to be where they lived. Was right in that Gulf Stream zone.
Moves all the feed.
Yeah, right. So, a few guys tried it, and I don't think anybody's really succeeded at it well.
What got you back to the bay?
So, I did a lot of tendering on the crab boats. Over the years, when I was deckhanded on crab boats, I'd tender in the bay. That was part of the deal. Did that for a while, and then I guess in the late 90s, I guess, my sister married a fisherman, Johnny Maybar, and they had a kid, my nephew Hunter, and so Johnny bought a permit and a boat that year for, it was big money back then. It was over $200,000 for an old Rawson and a permit, and old gas Rawson. Maybe the first fiberglass boat in the bay, I think. I've heard that before, and I haven't confirmed it, but the Able Mabel, and had a gas engine in it, old Rawson, and his first year he bought the boat, he could not keep that damn thing running, and so my sister's like, Tim, we just had a baby, Johnny just spent a whole pile of money on this boat, you need to come work for him and keep this boat running so he can make a living and pay for this thing and all the things. So I came and worked for Johnny for about 4 years. I did and then after that I think I did a year for his dad and a year for his brother, and then I finally, at the bottom, when I was actually heading to the Bahamas to run a lobster operation. I was going to run a lobster processing operation, floating processor, running with a bunch of skiffs that were out harvesting, and the whole thing was done. The deal was one more signature waiting. I was living in Hawaii. I said, okay, I'm on my way, and I shipped a crate of all our stuff and a bunch of boxes to Florida, and was getting ready to go run this lobster operation in the Bahamas. And there was one more signature that was happening tomorrow, kind of thing, when I left, and I'd spent a few weeks visiting family on my way across the country to visit or to get to start this lobster operation, and that signature never happened, and it fell apart. And I was actually visiting my mom, who was living out in Minnesota at that time, and I found out that I had 2 kids and a wife and no vehicles, and at my mom's house, and no job, because the Bohemian partner literally ghosted and went away at the last minute. So I started looking around, and I was like, well, shit, Bristol Bay permits are cheap right now. And so I bought a Bristol Bay permit for $18,000. Oh. And was like, okay, well, I'll try this. And knowing that I'd been involved in the Bay long enough that I knew that it didn't matter at that price. I just needed to buy it. So I didn't have much money then either, so I think I bought it on a cash advance on a credit card back when you could do that without getting raked over the coals. And a buddy of mine helped me out a little bit maybe, and we, in fact, the guy that I went to Dutch Harbor with in the first time. James, exactly. So he helped me out on that a little bit, and I bought that permit, and then...
Because a permit without a boat, or were you just D'ing it?
Well, permit's the most important part. There was no D's back then.
No,
back when I bought that wasn't like the early 2001 or something like that. You couldn't D it then. So I flew up that year with a permit, and it was like, I'll find a boat, and the price was so shitty, and I was like, I ended up just crewing, maybe made a couple grand as crew. I wasn't willing to take the risk on running my own operation, putting money out on a lease boat or anything. I ended up doing that for 2 years, I think. Actually, the next year I was going to come up, and then these guys offered me $5,000 to go to Africa for a couple months to go research fisheries over there, because Ghana had just opened up to the World Bank, so there was potential financing options for the fisheries over there. Some guys that I knew were interested in going over there, researching some of the crab fisheries, maybe building a test pot, doing some things over there. So I was like, I don't know if I can make $5,000 in Bristol Bay this year. So I took them up and went over to Ghana for a couple weeks and got the VIP treatment, and they wanted me to meet the president and fish ministers and all the things. I'm like, just get me to the docks where I can find out what's going on. That was my first VIP experience. Getting off at the airport, they said, Mr. Willis, when I'm standing in line for customs, I'm like, yeah, like, come with me, please. And we're walking down this white concrete hallway with a big line of people waiting for customs, and they open this door that you can't even see, this just looks like white concrete, and walk me in, sit me down on a leather couch, offer me a cup of coffee or whatever I want, and ask me for my passport, and took the easy way out, and then was over there for a couple weeks and talking to the locals and trying to get a sense of the fisheries over there, instead of coming to the Bay. And then the next year I came up and I went partners with John Spangler on the Star of Iceland, and ran the Star of Iceland for him that year with my permit. And then the year after that, I bought the Aaron Ray out of Igagig. And so I was into the Bay. I think I bought the Aaron Ray for $27,000. I bought the permit for $18,000. So I was into the Bay for $45,000. And some of my buddies had payments that were bigger than that, because the fisheries had crashed so far. Mm-hmm. So I was able to get in pretty inexpensively, and put a lot of money into that boat for a long time. Did all the things, the flush deck, the RSW, and then sold that and moved on to the Annie M, and then the sawbill and another permit for my son. And he fished that for several years, and then this year I actually put my deckhand on there with that permit, because my son was running the Confidence, so he was running that for crabbing, and needed to run that for tendering this summer as well.
Okay.
So that got me back to the Bay.
Now here we are. And here we sit, actually, in the bay.
And here we sit in the bay and finishing up another, we'll call it a successful season.
We are wrapping it up, but I think it has been successful.
Yeah.
But, all right, so what was your best experience when you were set netting? The one singular best experience.
Best experience set netting. So one of those Saturdays, when the Seventh-day Adventists all pulled their nets out of the water, and I went
for Debbie,
and I went and worked for Linda. I went and worked for Linda, and I think that was a 10,000-pound tide in one set net site. That was where I really understood what a full gill net looked like.
Right. What was your worst day set netting?
My worst day set netting? Oh, it was probably the day I broke my collarbone. It had to be.
Yeah.
It had to be. The season hadn't even started and it was over.
Okay. What about your best day crab fishing in the U.S.?
My best day crab fishing in the U.S. I went up. I was still on deck. I don't even think I was mate yet. It was a few days. It was on the Arctic Orion, I think, working for Buck Fowler. We went up blue crabbing, and it was like a 3.5 day season. It was quick. And we had a rotation. We were CPing. We had a rotation, and kind of the rotation was everybody's up when you're getting the pots off. Everybody's up when you're getting the pots on. And my rotation happened to be the one to where I think I got one sleep shift in 3.5 days. But we smoked them. I mean, we smoked them. I can't remember how much we caught that season, but we put as many blue crab about as you could put on a boat in 3.5 days.
How about your worst experience crab fishing in the U.S.?
On the westward. I crabbed on the westward. I never ran it for crabbing. I ran it for tendering. There was a day, I think they coined it Black Monday or something, a bear die season in, I don't know, early 90s maybe. And it was just a brutal storm. I think there was 23 distress calls to the Coast Guard. 3 boats sank. Amazing thing was nobody died. Everybody was rescued. One of the boats even didn't sink all the way. They ended up towing her in, the Shannon Marie, which I think became the Ocean Ballard. But that day was scary. It was savage. It was. I was out there on on the westward. It's a wooden power scow. Had a steel house and a steel bow and steel rails, but it was a wooden power scow, 86 foot or whatever, out there fishing the eastern bear die, and the seas were, above the mast, way above, just massive. We blew up some deck boards at one point. We turned to run with it so we could just go try to secure the deck boards so they weren't washed overboard, and took a wave on the stern that twisted a rudder post, which stainless steel rudder post, it's amazing that it didn't shear and it actually twisted. And so we took the rest of the storm, we ended up jogging into it with the rudders hard over so that we could keep a straight line, and then anytime we blew off to the port, we had to go hard port and do a circle and come back into it and make sure to keep the weather on the port side so that we could steer into the waves again. And that was a hectic storm. Was
that the scariest you've ever been at sea, or have you had another experience that's been more than that?
I'm not sure scared's the right word. I have a lot of respect for the boats that we're on. There's fear there for sure. There's respect, but the boats handle it, man. The boats that we fish up here, they're built for this. Even that little, that probably the best thing about that boat was that it wasn't too long and it rode more like a duck than some of the big boats. I heard some of my buddies that were on the mud boats had a tougher time during that storm than that boat did. But it was, I guess it was scary, but I don't ever remember being fearful. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't like worried.
At any point in all the years you've been on the water,
I wasn't sleeping.
At any point in your career, you've never been you never had that fear?
Not a fear of dying. No, not a fear of. That fear I don't think comes until it comes. It's like if you're not upside down, then you're still right side up.
You're just a duck.
You're still okay, right?
I think you have a different mentality than a lot of folks, Tim.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe a lot of us
chasing that adventure.
Maybe a lot of us do. That's why we keep doing it. You wouldn't come out here if you thought you were going to be scared all the time.
Yeah, true.
It's okay to. Doesn't mean I don't have a ton of respect. I try not to do stupid things. I know I could make myself scared real easy if I make bad decisions.
Sure.
But if you make good decisions, then you're probably going to be okay. So, yeah, that trip, that leads me into another story. We'll just keep going here, Mark. So we twisted that rudder post, and we rode the rest of that storm out. Finally, the weather came down, and I was just a deckhand at that point on that boat, and I was going to be the engineer on the next trip, and we went into Port Moller after the storm, and that was the first time I've seen it twice now. I've seen the Coast Guard drop pumps out of a C-130, and let me tell you, those guys are frickin' amazing. And this was the first time I did it. We were driving in after the storm, and I think it was the Sea Spray, if I remember right, had flooded their laths or something, and when we were jogging into Port Moller after the storm, or as it had come down pretty good, and we were right there passing the Sea Spray as the Coast Guard. We might have been jogging over towards them just to keep an eye on them. Until the Coast Guard got there. And the Coast Guard came by and they dropped a pump out of the C-130, and they literally laid the chute line over the back deck. The pump landed right off the port side of the boat. The chute line went right. The guys just pulled the pump right on board. It was just flipping amazing.
With the C-130.
With a C-130. It's not a helicopter where you're hovering and aiming, and they're doing, I don't know how slow a C-130 can go, but it's got to be doing 130 or something.
Yeah, probably a minimum.
Yeah, it was so impressive. And so those guys got it pumped out, and we kept going. And we went into Port Moller to try to figure our rudder deal out. And so we went up next to the cannery there, closed down for the winter, obviously, but, went up and tied up to the dock and waited for the tide, and we're just going to go dry and see what we could figure out with our rudder. And so then we go wait for the tide to go up and start coming down. We go up around the side of the dock to tie up where we can go dry, and just nudge the bow into the beach a little bit. All good, get tied up, and the engine room starts flooding. And so we're, no fear there because you're tied up, right? You can crawl up on the dock if the boat goes down. But I'm like, well, what the hell's going on? And the engineer that we had was suspect on decision making. He's like, he's got all his pumps on supposedly, and I'm like, we're still making water. So I crawl up in the bow in this labyrinth, the old wooden boat, and I find that there's PVC, 4-inch PVC plumbing for these crab tanks that's sheared. Just that little bump into the beach sheared this PVC, so it's flooding the whole boat. And so I'm down there in the bow, and I push the PVC back together, and I put my foot on it, and I'm just holding the PVC back together so that we're not leaking, or leaking way less, slower than we were leaking. And I'm just holding it there, and I'm thinking, okay, well, somebody's going to come eventually and find me and find out what's going on. They know where I was going. And I'm up there for a half hour or so, and nobody shows up. And I'm just up there stopping the leak, making it not worse.
They fixed it already.
And they're back there thinking they're pumping. And the water's not going down. And I still got my foot in the water. So finally I'm able to find an old gaff, and I'm grabbing whatever I can without taking my foot off it and letting more water in. And I finally find enough cribbing and whatnot to get my foot out of there and wedge it in so it's held in to position, and I crawl out of there and I go back to the engine room, and they still got the same amount of water down there. Well, it turns out that he never closed the sea chest, so the bilge pump was just pumping seawater from under the boat over the side instead of actually taking it out of the engine room.
Right.
And going over. So once we got that sorted out, we got the boat. He flew out, and I took over the engineering job at that point on that boat.
Tim, we might have to finish this next summer.
I probably got another story or two for you, Mark.
I imagine that. But before we end this, do you have anything that's important for you to say? Any final words? Thoughts?
Yeah, I've heard you ask this question on a couple of your other interviews, and I've kind of thought about it a little bit, and I haven't really come up with anything.
Do you know why I asked it?
No, I'd love to hear that.
Okay, I'll tell you why. 4 folks that I've interviewed have passed away, and all 4 of those folks' families go back and listen. It's kind of morbid, right? But they appreciate it. They appreciate the episodes. They appreciate that they existed. And so that's kind of where it came from, is to ask, do you have anything to share? Because somewhere, someplace, sometime, this is going to exist beyond us.
Yeah.
It's going to. Just like the picture your daughter took of herself when she was 13 and sent it to her boyfriend. It exists somewhere. So someday this is going to exist somewhere, and you and I won't.
So do I got anything to say that's,
Would you have chosen a different life? Would you have chosen a different path?
I thought about that a lot. I went to college, and I went as a business major, studying accounting, just because I thought I could make a good living at it, and numbers came pretty easy for me, and I would have been miserable. Had I had any better guidance, maybe an engineering path would have been interesting to me. At one time in my career, I'd actually got accepted to Maine Maritime to a boat design program they had up there. And then I ended up getting a good fishing job offer that I couldn't refuse.
If you would have used some of that accounting experience to save some of that crab money.
That might have worked out okay too. But I've always said I love fishing. I absolutely love fishing. I sure as hell wouldn't do it for free. I've got a wonderful wife that was able to appreciate the lifestyle that worked for me. I mean, the ability to check out, go fishing, do my thing, make my living, and then check out from that and go back and be 100% there for the family. And that worked for me. That worked really well for me. The fact that it also worked for my wife, at least long enough to keep us together for everything, was huge. The fact that she could understand that, I mean, that's something that a lot of ladies can't handle, or men even. So that worked. That really worked out well for me. Fishing's been great for me. I love the fact that it's never boring. That it uses all the parts of your brain. That I've got a master's license. I've got an engineer's license. Both. I've put time in at both those occupations, or both those different genres of the industry. I like doing that. I like being able to know everything about the boat and being able to feel confident with all of it.
It's easier when it's only 32 foot long.
Yeah, well, it is easier, but yeah, the Bountiful's 160. There's a little bit more going on there.
Yeah, I'm just saying that nowadays the smaller ones.
It is, yeah. I like being able to problem solve. I like being able to have that part of, and that's important. And it's hard to find in a lot of different industries. A lot of places you get pigeonholed.
I think it might be in your blood a little bit, because anytime that I've experienced someone on the dock having an issue or a problem, you seem to be more than willing to help.
I do like helping.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that's our industry, right? It is. It's maritime. You got to help someone else.
Absolutely.
But you seem to be more than.
I want everybody to succeed.
Sure.
I want everybody to succeed. I want to be able to impart my experiences and knowledge and yeah.
Before we close out, tell me about your son.
So my son, followed in my footsteps. He started fishing for me when he was 12.
I'm going to interview him, so don't tell me all about it.
Okay, he started fishing for me when he was 12. He ended up going his own way, doing a bunch of different fisheries. Worked one crab boat with me, and now he's running crab boats and running the tender out here, and the boat that he's been fishing in the bay went to deckhand, and he transferred his permit over, and he's bored to death and really wants to come back.
Yeah. You proud of him?
I'm very proud of him. He's done really well, and I think he's a problem solver. He's gonna go far in this industry if he chooses to stay with it.
A little bit of his dad in there, I guess.
I would hope.
Yeah.
I would hope.
All right. Any other final thoughts there, Tim?
No. Super fun, Mark. It was great.
It's been great. We got to continue next summer.
All right. I'm sure I can come up with some more. We might have to listen to these and find out which stories I missed.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with. You're a natural born storyteller, so it makes it a little easier.
Thank you.
But I think we've heard a lot of new things about our industry during this one. So thanks for taking the time.
You bet.
And guys, I just got to point out that he is wearing Extra Toughs as our sponsor. It's I got to look for opportunities, but yeah, I see you chose the deck slipper.
I like that. Is that what they call this?
I don't know. That's what I call them. I'm a fan of the original Alaska boot, right?
You know what? If I can wear these, I'll wear them all day long. I used to wear my tall ones turned down on any deck that wasn't that wet, so I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of the tall ones. Well, mainly I was always wet. Right?
Those wet decks, you gotta have them.
All right, Tim. Well, thanks for taking the time, and guys, make sure you follow us on Instagram. Share the stories out there. Help us get around a little bit. We are coming up on Pacific Marine Expo. Galley Stories has been offered in a booth there again. We will be there for our 3rd year in a row. Excited about that. Excited to share the stories. So until then, guys, we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.